All right, we are live. It is Thursday, June 29th. I was about to say May 29th, but it's crazy how fast this year is going by. But I thought it would be awesome. There's so much changing in the full self-driving space with Waymo and Cruise, and the ride-sharing apps are just changing as well, and as more and more people are doing fleets. But really, a lot of this is going to be stemmed and rooted because the robo-taxi market is coming, right? Uber potentially even having their fleet, and all of these other companies really being able to tap into this robo-taxi market, really. And a lot of that is going to be built on a lot of ride sharing apps. And so I'm really excited today specifically to bring in a personal friend. And actually, I have a really fun story about how we, not, yeah, actually, technically how we met. But I'm really excited to just share specifically Ryan's journey about how he was a former Tesla employee, and then he ultimately started the Kilowatts, which was just really all things EVs, and really just sharing, the latest updates on EVs, and this helping this transition and broadcasting that. And he also literally, I don't know if the correct term is, he was the spy, really just being able to draw out all of the latest and upcoming things that are happening with Tesla. He was always that one person that you could count on to find the car in the whole Bay Area that either hadn't been seen yet, or the latest features or things to be showcased just hadn't been seen. He was that guy. And then now he's also owned the largest Tesla Toro fleet in the Bay Area, and if not, even on the Pacific or the West Coast, really. So it's really, exciting to see what he's been up to. And then we're going to share a little bit about what he's been up to on Dispatch, which I don't want to get into quite yet. So let's bring Ryan. What's up?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. It's kind of funny having you on the channel because, like, you're a fellow member. You're, been a huge supporter. I feel like, done, two really big things together in the past 3 years. One being, doing the full self-driving. You came, I think, the day after, just to experience. No, the day of, actually. It was like, it
Yeah.
was Raj and I in the car the night before, and then you came that Thursday. I believe it was October 2020. And then yeah, so that was crazy. And then, you and I had the privilege to interview Elon Musk for the record, 4 hours in Austin, to the point where actually several of your even some of your questions have gone viral. I think our longest standing one is the question, or where you really talked about his philanthropy, right? And I think that view on TikTok got 11 million views.
I think it was philosophy. His
Philosophy,
philosophy on
yeah.
life. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and you're doing so much in the space, and so you've been a huge resource not only to the community about the latest EV news, but just being able to spot, literally the latest things that are happening with Tesla, some of the sightings that you've had on the early Model Ys, Model S's. So I'm really excited to have you here to just talk about, what you've seen since the start of full self-driving, and then also too, really what you're up to, what you have partially been up to, and then this transition into dispatch EV. So, but one thing I did want to share was, so actually, this is how Ryan and I met. I know he probably hates the story, but Ryan is one of those guys that loves to see how far his EV can go. So he will literally push his car to 0% and see if he can get that extra 5 miles that is like somehow promised.
Hmm.
So we were at Tejon Ranch the night before the Cybertruck reveal, and at the time he was working at Tesla, but he literally pulled up on a flatbed truck. And it was funny because I saw him there, and then the next day I see him at the event, and I'm like, what are you like?
This is the same
Yeah,
guy.
exactly. Because it was late. It was like 10, I don't even remember, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, maybe even later than that. But yeah, so it's just super, super happy to have you. But how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, thank you. I still remember that day, that night, very well. It was something where I was not an employee on the events team, but a lot of people from the events team is small, especially back then and still now. And so they pull in people from other departments. And I had been kind of asked or kind of told like, hey, we may need you. And that's why it was all very last minute for me getting down there. It was last minute for me being a part of it. Some of the tasks I did were kind of like small, and then they ended up needing someone to drive the performance Model 3 at the event. They were trying to show off their non-Cybertruck. So there's a line for, oh, go ride in the Cybertruck, or go ride in the Model 3, or go ride in the Model S, or go ride in the Model X. And so yeah, I was in charge of driving the 3. So that weekend was a lot about limits. I was pushing the limits to get down there, and then once I was actually down there, I was pushing the limits on the Performance 3. I was told basically, drive safely, but help show like what these cars can do. And so I was driving through Hawthorne, especially on the freeway on ramp and off ramps, kind of really showing off what was possible with and obviously with the autopilot at that time, showing off what it could do.
Yep. No, that's awesome. But it was just a funny story. I literally met you rolling into the Tejon Pass. Um, well, let's get into it. Just tell me about even your first experience with the full self-driving beta. Even from when you came out to to see what I had at the time, again back in October 2020. And then I know you even have several cars now with full self-driving. I shout out to Darren Young for, he came and he was blessed to have your car to just, experience full self-driving. He came from Singapore, so they don't have it there. But just talk to us about like kind of the early days, what you're seeing now. And then I even want to get into some of the work you did with Arash and even Omar, specifically on the great self-driving race, as we call it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a video I've been wanting to make for a long time. So yeah, going back to kind of the first experience I had with you guys, full self-driving was very impressive back then. It clearly showed promise. But at that point, like I struggle to say it, but like it was like almost unsafe or unsettling. You like obviously at the end of the day, full self-driving as Tesla has implemented it has been a driver assistance system. But back then, it was really well known and talked about like, oh, it could do the worst thing at the worst time. Now it doesn't feel nearly as much like that. But back then I remember like it was the kind of thing where we would get set and almost immediately maybe it would make a bad turn. And then it would go for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and make no bad turns. Um, Now I feel like it's like the trail of nines is very long, and but I definitely feel where it is full self-driving is much more confident. It's much more comfortable. It's not making, I think one of the biggest, most obvious things that's not easy to see over time is that it's not making like dramatically wrong errors. It still makes errors, but they're not ones where it's like, oh, there's a skateboard over there, head towards it. Back then it was the kind of thing where it was like, if it saw something it didn't expect, it would do something completely unexpected. And now if it sees something it doesn't expect, you kind of know what it might do. It's more
predictable almost.
Yeah, predictable. The way I would compare it is like it went from like a 4-year-old driver playing a video game, just like wondering, oh, I wonder what would happen if I did this, to a 16-year-old that's trying to impress themselves to their parents. And it feels much more reliable. But for me, still, and I'm very much a supporter of Tesla, very much a believer in Tesla, but it still feels like I'm one of the holdouts saying I know that this will get there where it's like, especially with a human there, it's gonna be better than a human driver. I'm still a holdout in the sense of I wonder if and when the current hardware is going to allow us to sit in the back or not be present in the vehicle at all. So I think that's what leads me to some of the videos, some of the content that you see from me is like, I'm very much interested and excited by both with like my existing fleet with the Kilowatts and then the plans with dispatch. There's a world in which dispatch doesn't have as strong of a business, specifically being that it's an EV car sharing company, that like if Tesla is able to achieve full robo-taxis, no one needs to be in it tomorrow, then I should maybe not be working on dispatch nearly as much. And so I am, as a result of being skeptical, like, okay, how can we optimize that experience right now? I think, again, having a car that can do the majority of the driving, if not all the driving, as long as you're in the driver's seat, is a step change in technology and should be monetized. But my question is, are we approaching true robo-taxi? Can we not have someone in the vehicle like as it drives from San Francisco to Seattle. Because I'd love to be able to like, if I'm in a business meeting, if I'm in a rush, fly out of SFO, get to Seattle, and then later that night my car shows up. And I just wonder how close we are to that. And I'm kind of building a business that hedges on that future.
Yeah, no, it's actually not that you're betting against it, but you're also just banking that we're several years, if not, maybe more than that away. And I don't disagree with that sentiment. I think even in Elon's head, he can sometimes oversimplify problems. As we know, he may be always late, but he typically always delivers. And if not, he does always deliver. It's just a little bit late sometimes. So even with
Yeah.
this, I think even at the shareholder meeting, I was sitting next to Joe. And Joe was like, he actually stood up and was like, "Don't give us an estimate."
That was him. That was Joe.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was him. That was Joe.
Don't do
So
it,
it was,
Elon. Because he always does. He always says it'll be, at end of this year up until like the last month of the year. And that's, well, and even in our interview, fortunately, I had the chance to ask him that question during our interview. And yeah, he gave kind of the same answer, which is, I expected by the end of this year, but that was now. I think you just tweeted the other day, that was a year ago that he said that to us. And so
yeah,
I don't have any lack of faith that Tesla will, let me clarify. I don't have any lack of faith that Tesla will eventually solve full self-driving. Their cars will drive themselves fully autonomously at some point in time. I think the question is how many of their current cars will achieve that and in what timeline?
yeah,
Whether it requires a retrofit or a redesign. As Tesla started to communicate things like if you look back at their recent meeting in Texas, or one of their more recent, not the shareholder, but the one before that, Elon, was talking about the next vehicle, calling it the robo-taxi. What does that mean for our current vehicles? So, yeah, I'm skeptical. I'm patient, but I'm also taking action. Again, we have this incredible technology, these incredible vehicles, very safe vehicles in multiple ways. What can we do to maximize their value now? And that's why I'm starting Dispatch.
yeah. No, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. But you also have this great opportunity, and it sounds like you said you've been wanting to make this video, but thankfully we're in the heart of the Silicon Valley. We know Waymo has been driving their cars around Mountain View probably for the past 10, 15 years. It feels like it's been a minute. They've now gone up to San Francisco and a bunch of, they're in other places, I believe, even Los Angeles and, other places. We know Cruise, which is owned by GM, that is going in San Francisco as well. So tell us a little bit about what your experience was, and then really like, what you saw as far as the three different technologies.
Yeah, and there's even some more color here that we can provide. But yeah, like Waymo has been at it for several years, jumping between vehicle types. They initially wanted to design their own vehicle, then they did the Chrysler, Pacifica, and then now it seems like they're leaning hard into iPaces, which is great because it's an EV first platform. Cruise, yeah, absolutely interesting to see what they're doing there as well. They've been kind of building on the Chevy Bolt. And then one that isn't talked about often is also Zoox. They're part of the game, and
True.
supposedly they just launched their robo-taxi only to employees in Las Vegas. So it's definitely,
Crazy.
there's a lot of players that are trying to solve this, and in a very different way than Tesla is. But yeah, it's finally where it's like, okay, we have some real competition. We can, without necessarily calling them all robo taxis, what would it look like for three cars to go across San Francisco? And so that's what we did with Omar, Arash, and myself just last week was kind of said, okay, let's find 2 points. And there was like intentionally some casual nature to finding those 2 points. We didn't want it to be too structured. We didn't want to test the routes ahead of time. But like, yeah, what would like a potential commute look like in the city? Let's give it some distance. Let's make sure that it's not just 10 blocks. Let's go across the city, and within the parameters of what these cars would let us do. Waymo, for example, cuts out kind of the northeast section of the city, almost all the financial district, and Cruise only operates at night, but pretty much covers the whole city. There's like some like little bubbles, some little pockets where it's probably got some corners that it's not comfortable with yet. But yeah, Tesla hypothetically can do it all. So we just said, okay, let's take the windiest road in the city, Vermont Street, which is not too far from where I work, from where I live. start in Vermont Street. It's like Lombard, very windy, but actually windier. And then let's go over towards the Golden Gate Bridge. And there were some restrictions with how close, within a parking lot, how deep in the parking lot we could go. So we chose the Walt Disney Museum and just said, all right, let's get out of there and set off. And so yeah, we ended up having our own little robo-taxi race. What I believe is probably the first of many.
Yeah. And what was the experience like? Like, did you, or maybe what was your thought going into it? Did you think that there was going to be one car that stood out the most? And then from there, let's just talk about your actual experience, like with all
Yeah,
three. Or I don't think you were in
yeah.
all three, but
But I've been
what?
in all three. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
even just like the night before last, I was on the cruise again. Yeah, again, I don't consider myself as the foremost expert in this space, but yeah, I kind of from a casual consumer's perspective, as I try to bring to my EV reviews as well, with the kilowatts. Yeah, I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be interesting. One, we did when we were calling the cars, saw that Cruise did not want to go down Vermont Street. So it wouldn't even let us call it into like kind of the parking area. So I thought, hey, that might be an advantage because if it's not going south initially, maybe it's going north, and that would lead it to better success. I did know that they limit it to 25 miles per hour, which matters, but in San Francisco, most of the speed limits don't really get beyond 35. So as long as you're on the highway, you're kind of at par. And then Waymo, I've experienced it a couple times, not that many at this point. I think I'd gotten access just earlier that same week. So like within 7 days, I only used it twice basically to set up cameras and just experience it once, just to see how it worked. And then with Tesla, yeah, I thought that it would have some advantages, but I also thought it would be that Omar, being the Tesla driver in that video, would have to turn it off at some point. And there's one case where maybe he should have seen what happened if it was safe to. He ended up pulling up to a yellow light, kind of going too fast, and um, not clear whether or not it would have gone through or whether it would have stopped just at the line, just past the line. But yeah, I thought that if we, as long as we handicap the Tesla for any time it has to be truly deactivated, I thought it was a pretty fair race. I wasn't expecting um, anyone to have a clear advantage going into that.
yeah. And then, did you guys say that there was like a clear winner, or
Oh
was
yeah,
it just?
yeah,
Well, I don't
yeah,
necessarily want to give it away, but how like was it even close? Obviously I don't want to spill the beans
yeah.
myself, but I thought you could go into that.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, I'm fine sharing. It's a video that's out there. There's like three different videos to view. There's Arash's kind of vlog style, his personal experience, especially I think it was his first time in a Waymo, and so kind of just like sharing, like just literally how does it feel for him. And then mine was kind of more of like a summary video, kind of recapping at the end of it. And then Omar's, it's literally just all three cameras pretty much playing the audio the whole time, really getting our first person experience there. And so you can see exactly how it operates. I had one little camera failure that cuts out for like 10 seconds, but it's a very real test. And so I'm going to say here, like, if you haven't seen it yet, go check out one of them, all three of them. But I think it's fine if we
Posting
talk about it.
yeah, I'm posting your link in our comment, and then I'll add it to the bottom of the Twitter, as well as we're talking through it.
Yeah, but I think we can only go so far in this conversation without talking about it. So at this point, if spoiler alert has been placed, uh, yeah, the Tesla won, and the Tesla won by a good margin. Um, again, Omar did have to accelerate through one light, and that doesn't make it truly driverless, but to some degree, and I don't think this is the case, but I did have this happen the other night where I was in a cruise. It got stuck behind some cones, and sorry, my dog is going crazy with one of my shoes.
You're good, man. It's not like yeah, actually the funny thing is we didn't even hear that.
Good, but AirPods are pretty great. But yeah, basically, the Tesla won by like several minutes over the Waymo, and the Cruise came in last. And None of them were like particularly bad experiences. Again, Omar had to push through one yellow light. Arash kind of thought that he had the lead. It was very comfortable for him. There wasn't really too much, except for to get kind of close to a trash collecting truck. And then mine, I did have one moment where it stopped for like 30 seconds without alert, without warning, without communication. Again, I don't know if Cruise then took over and resumed the trip, if they received some kind of alert or what, but um, it was a great show of where the technology is for all three of these products at this time. It feels like we achieved what we were looking to achieve, like show here's what it's like. Um, Cruise, it was a way right now for free to get across the city. Waymo, similarly, for free to get across the city. And then lastly, like Tesla, if you own one, if you have access to one, it can get you across the city with very minimal intervention and hopefully soon very minimal or no intervention or attention. And he's got another shoe.
Yeah, we're at some point we're gonna have autonomous robo dogs just eating
Yes.
shoes just for the heck of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's all very helpful. I mean, it's interesting too, just given one, how long Waymo has been around. Cruise obviously is kind of newish to the game, but even these are the only kind of specific regions that these companies are they have their taxis in or their driverless cars, and yet Tesla kind of edged them out, which is pretty crazy. And the way that
Mhm.
Tesla is actually trying to disrupt this space is they're tackling it with the fact of like from a general perspective. They're not saying, hey, we want to become an expert in Mountain View and then we're going to move out of there, or in Palo Alto where their headquarters is. Like you could be in Montana, in a small city there versus going to Austin, Texas, Miami, Florida, or even obviously San Francisco like you just were, and you can turn it on. It's not necessarily, again, sure, it's not, as you said, doing those really unpredictable things like it did probably originally in the early days, but now it's a lot more predictable. It's making, certain mistakes, but it's just crazy to think that here we are in 2023. If you were to think of like the company that you're going to bet on, it's going to be Tesla, just because of the way that they're tackling it, especially based on even just your experience. But I'm not sure if you would.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I agree with you. I think that Tesla's approach is different in a way that makes them potentially better. And I think for me, it just comes down to like data collection, like that Cruise and Waymo, every mile, especially when they're operating these like for free, it's costing them quite a bit to do so. Tesla's making money in doing so, and they have more cars collecting more data. It is notably different data, and I think a lot of Tesla fans don't necessarily think about that. They treat it as like, oh, well, it's full self-driving miles are driverless miles, and that's not the same. But I do think being able to collect it and understand it and interpret it and do more with it uh, is very meaningful. Again, the fact that Cruise is still limited to 25 miles per hour Waymo, um, I haven't found their limitations as much. I think it's worth me exploring more with Waymo um, because I've only had access for a couple of days, I'll call it. It's technically been like maybe a week and a half now. But yeah, these companies are getting there, but the rate at which they can get there in small niche circles versus like, other than snow, I would feel pretty safe turning on full self driving and being there to take over pretty much anytime, anywhere. And that means they're getting data from anytime, anywhere. Cruise and Waymo and Zoox, they're not getting data in pouring rain on the way to Tahoe. Like Tesla has the ability to just collect way more experiences in a day, and that is very valuable to understand this. I had again experiences just the night before last where it's like that's one experience, but that then you collect that data all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I did see I think it was your post on Cruise, right? It just stopped in the middle of the road with a car right behind you. I think I saw you flip the camera.
Yeah, and the worst part is that wasn't the only thing. Like I don't want to rag on Cruise too much, but that specific ride, I got in the car, and it's supposed to be driverless. It's supposed to kind of be awesome. Like you can just be present with whoever you're in the car with, or if you're on a phone call or whatever. Hypothetically, I could be taking this call rather than like in an Uber where I'd feel awkward. I could take this as a live stream in the back of an autonomous robo-taxi. But as I was getting into the Cruise, I accidentally forgot to unlock it from my phone. So I grabbed the handle. I was like, oh shoot, let me unlock it from my phone. So I unlocked it from my phone, got in, and immediately there was someone from Cruise support saying, hey, it looked like you had issues getting into the car. Like, oh yeah, sorry about that. I didn't unlock it. Like, okay, great. Let us know if you have any troubles. Totally fine. Takes a few seconds. But again, it did interrupt the kind of the flow of me and my partner were kind of just getting back from this comedy show. But that's fine. We're now off and running and able to talk about the comedy show again. And a couple of blocks later, we actually ended up behind some construction cones. There was like someone was dealing with some plumbing, so the manhole was up. There was a pickup truck, and then 3 or 4 cones, and the car struggled to get around that. And so again, they came over the intercom and supposedly, I still don't really know because of the weird timing of it, remotely controlled it around those cones. Ironically, I didn't post that thinking, oh, that's not that big of a deal. It was fine. I did film it though. I still have that video. And then I actually woke up, I want to say this morning, seeing that someone else was stuck behind that same set of trucks and cones. And they supposedly had a Cruise employee come out and actually drive them home, which is like, the time lost there. Like we're so far from robotaxi. If that's the case happening often, I don't think it's happening often, but if it is,
Yep.
These are the situations where machine learning, more data, more experiences. How many times did Cruise experience that intersection that night or experiences like that? And how many more does Tesla have? Again, when someone does take over and teach it the right way around, how much is it learning there? And so I just think that, again, large data sets, more experiences means that, yeah, it's not just 2 times that car experienced that and then only one where it actually was like remote controlled around. But like, yeah, these things need to happen often. So you see how to interact with that. What happens when the person who's working underground comes out from under the manhole? Should the car operate differently? Should it slow down a little bit differently? So there's so much complexity in these rare situations, and I didn't even talk about the one that I posted to Twitter where it really like just stopped and waited at an intersection for seemingly no reason. And the light cycled twice, and a homeless person actually came up and heckled us, or was planning on heckling the car, making fun of the robot, and then saw us there and threw up a peace sign to make sure we felt safe. But yeah, again, my partner, we got out of that, and she was like, I do not want to do that ever again. And for me, I'm like, oh, I collect data. It's fun to have these experiences, content, and it's free. Like, we Ubered there for $17. We cruised back for free. It's a very fascinating time. It's a very fascinating time.
Yeah, no, it's that's really interesting. What would you say based on it sounds like you've obviously been in the city a lot. You live in the city, but you've obviously experienced a lot of it. What would you say are probably the biggest challenges, even from your experience with Tesla? Like, obviously, even to the point where you're going to start pretty much an EV ride sharing platform. Even previously before that, you've owned the largest Toro Tesla EV, or really EV fleet probably in the whole Bay Area, right? Outside of maybe like Hertz now. But to talk to us a little bit about, what you think probably are the biggest, or most like that last 2 to 10% that, these companies are going to have to accomplish that are going to be the most difficult to get past based on, it could be based on the edge cases you've seen or just your overall general experience.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm someone who's very comfortable with driving, but I also do really like leaning into these systems. So it's like, as a result of being comfortable driving, like in any environment, like San Francisco, New York, wherever, like I really do. I don't know. Maybe I'm a control freak. So like I enjoy FSD, but I don't use it like to the depth. I use it on the highway all the time. Enhanced autopilot or FSD on the highway. But even then, like if there's traffic, like I'm often taking over. My cars probably have more disengagements than most just from a convenience thing. Like, I don't like being over in the right lane more than a half mile before my exit because often that might be significantly slower. And so yeah, like I think that there's just like it's a combination for Tesla of like being aggressive yet comfortable. And you know, you have to ask my partner or anyone who rides in cars with me often to know if I personally achieve that. I think I do. I think we all think we do. But yeah, it's Tesla has to not only make it, as long as it's a driver assistance system. Let me clarify. As long as it's a driver assistance system, it has to be more aggressive while still staying fairly comfortable. And they've done a pretty good job of that second part, staying comfortable while slowly making it more aggressive. I will say if it's the kind of thing where you don't need to even like be present in the car, they don't necessarily have to make it more aggressive. It is seemingly close enough, even if it, you know, worst case scenario, it misses an exit, it comes back around the next block. I think that they're pretty close on that. Um, it looks like your camera might be overheating, so hopefully we keep you here. Oh, your audio is muted. If we lose John, we'll still have me. You're still muted on my end.
Yeah, sorry. Do you want to? I'll just drop out for like 2 seconds. But yeah, if you just want to keep talking about what you think the future is, I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
I will. You got it. So yeah, anyways, sorry we're missing John, but yeah, basically the other thing to consider for those of you watching is that like, you know, Cruise again, hearing that they're limited to 25 miles per hour makes me concerned of a potential ceiling. What is potentially in the processing of data that's limiting them to 25 right now? I think they're obviously probably artificially limited to 25, but where is their ceiling? Is their ceiling 35 miles per hour? Can they not, you know, are they not collecting enough data fast enough to operate at 50 miles per hour? And then Waymo seems like they're testing on the freeway occasionally, but it's hard to tell because that might just be like maintenance yards or where they're charging them. But similarly, again, you've got all these like spinning lidars, um, and the question again becomes how fast is their compute? What is their ceiling? Because at the end of the day, I think the promise of robo taxis is that it could take us anywhere. It could take us. Uh, Again, I'd love to have my car meet me in Seattle. I'd love to have a car be able to take me to Tahoe. And so it needs to be able to achieve 65, 75. And, you know, ideally, if the safety plays out, that it can go well beyond, and we could have, you know, a lane for robo taxis that you could go 100 miles per hour in. Everyone else, because you're manually driving, it's not as safe to manually drive. Then we might limit those people to slower speeds. But yeah, I think that there's a case for robo taxis should be able to, or should be, we should be designing them to be able to go well in excess of 65 miles per hour. And the only uh, vehicle that even comes close to that right now is Tesla doing a maximum of 85. So I think it's just worth noting that like the speed limit caps, kind of like the geofences, speed limit caps aren't talked about enough. That is something that we should really try to understand and process because it is a technical limitation in terms of how far ahead can you see and how fast are you processing the environment around you? How fast are you able to respond to that environment?
Yeah, well, thanks for dealing with that. It's funny. I literally just put in a brand new battery that's fully charged and it's still saying it's gonna die. So that's interesting. But
Yeah,
all
if
yeah.
it's the Canon R5, that thing overheats sometimes, especially at 4K.
Yeah, yeah, that could be it's the R50 EOS. But
Oh,
yeah, no, I think you brought up a good point. I definitely, a lot of the times that when I'm engaging in full self-driving specifically, or disengaging is mainly convenience. Like when I need to get to soccer practice or to get something pretty quickly, like I just don't have that time versus like, obviously when you're taking an Uber, you can kind of talk to the driver in front of you like, hey, I need to step on it a little bit. I got to get there. And maybe they don't
that,
always do it. Obviously, they're going to do what's comfortable, but I would say that that's probably, I would say the two biggest areas is a lot of it's convenience if you're dealing with, any time friction. And then number two, I think the other thing that I personally noticed is especially during like traffic hour, there's, as you said, there's certain situations where it's not aggressive enough. So, let's say you're getting on the on ramp, even in San Francisco, you actually, sometimes people will go really close up to the front and then cut in. And even if, the full self driving were to do that, it's not aggressive enough to like slip in it really close or just make a really aggressive move. And a lot of times I'll get just kind of stuck and I'll have to disengage and be aggressive myself and then re-engage, right?
Mhm.
Especially as you said, you don't always have the time to sit half a mile back to the exit. And that could cost you another 3 to 5 minutes, just depending on how how long the line is. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but, I wanted to kind of switch, into the topic of, ride sharing, right? And I think, obviously you being a former Tesla employee to having one of the largest fleets in the Bay Area for EVs, first off, like what made you want to do that? And then let's just talk about like the future of ride sharing, what, you've experienced with Toro, what you've experienced, um, or not Toro, but Uber, Lyft, and really
Mhm.
potentially like, where is this all headed?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a very interesting distinction between car sharing and ride sharing, and it's definitely like a space that I'm interested in both. And like I think to some degree, the holy grail for everyone is like for all these companies, I'll say, is ride sharing. Is again, Uber has been teaching us about this for decades now. Like once we can get profitable, it'll be insanely profitable. But the reality is like, yeah, unfortunately, the human labor cost doesn't always make sense. I'm not willing to pay basically twice whatever it costs me to get there to get there with someone uh, in the car at all times. So like, if I want to go to Tahoe, I'm not gonna, pay someone to go to Tahoe with me. But if the car can drive itself, then there we go. There's the holy grail. So yeah, Uber, Lyft, Tesla, Waymo, Cruise, Zoox, all these companies are, I see as in competition. Dispatch will hypothetically be in competition. Hertz, Avis are all in competition. We're trying to provide transportation as a service. And the more that we can remove the driver, whether it be the individual who's trying to get the place or the individual who's supporting that process, is kind of the biggest cost. It's a matter of people, labor, time, and it's great that we have um, you know Uber and Lyft right now as functional solutions, but they're not really making profit like that because they're it's a fight to the bottom for the consumer. It's a fight to the top for the driver. They're always trying to choose which app will make them more money. And so, yeah, I don't know necessarily what your question was, but it's just it's a very fascinating market to be kind of on all sides of, as like the OEM who's making the car, the Kilowatts who's sharing cars on Turo, and now hopefully like Dispatch who's like providing the platform either for car sharing or helping facilitate ride sharing. The platform we're building is designed to kind of support both, depending on where we go and when we get there.
Yeah. No, yeah, and sorry, if I confused them a little bit. I was mainly talking about the car sharing aspect, but,
Hmm.
how have you felt specifically obviously, why did you go, like, electric vehicles,
Ah,
car sharing and you versus, like, gas, right? So that's the
sure.
first
Yeah.
question, and then ultimately, like, why are you starting Dispatch? We'll get into that. That'll probably be the second
Yeah.
question, but first, how did you start the Kilowatts, running the largest car sharing EVs like fleet really in the Bay
Yeah.
Area?
Yeah. So I love that question because it's deeply personal. Just from like a very young age. Uh, like I've got my parents to thank for this, but I had the opportunity to travel to get outside my little bubble. Being a kid in the '90s, there was much more like riding around on your bikes and to go play with your friends in the yard kind of thing. And so, from a young age, it went from like just going down to play soccer in the yard with my neighbor, like that we could see from our house, to where our parents trusted me to go on several dozen-mile long bike rides to go see some of my friends in the next town over. Again, I grew up in the East Bay area. It's a fairly safe area, and I was just like, I loved, like, in a way, like bikes are a great example of this, where it's like the cost of getting from point A to point B is just low. But if you want to get, like, now my friends aren't just the next town over. My friends are in Portland. My friends are in Seattle. My friends are in LA. My friends are, obviously still here in San Francisco as well. But I have a deep obsession for low cost transportation. And bikes are great for most people as long as the weather's good in certain distances. Let's say less than 3 to 5 miles. Uh, Walking is great for less than a mile. But I think that like EVs have the promise to dramatically and maybe even start to compete with bikes as far as like anything beyond 5 miles. Like you just should be in an EV. The cost can be so low. Maintenance is lower. Electricity has the potential to be very, very low. Um, uh, Efficiency could go up as well. So EVs have this like inherent promise of being better versus gas cars. It's never really been like, if you look at the gas chart, it's always going to get more expensive. It's a limited resource. We naturally have limitations versus electricity. We can generate it whatever way is cheapest, transmit it in incredibly cheap ways once the cables are in the ground, and they mostly are already in the ground. And then we can use it. And it just, again, it has the promise of being ever cheaper. So it just, once I learned about Tesla, back around when they IPO'd, like 2011, 2010-ish, um, it's always been kind of like, oh, I wonder how I can help participate in that. So getting my internship there in like
Super cool.
2014. Yeah, it's always been like, how do I use my skills as a
Yeah.
storyteller to support bringing down the cost of transportation, both selfishly and selflessly, wanting people to be able to just enjoy the world more easily and get out of their homes. And I think it matters to so much of how we live. How cheaply can we get there?
Yep. Yeah, and what so obviously you worked at Tesla, but obviously you even started like how many cars do you have now? Even right now, and then are you like what's your plan with dispatch? Like how are you've been on Toro, but like why do something different?
Yeah, great question. Because Turo is pretty good. I don't want to like bash them. They're actually a pretty good platform. I started on them basically when I was at Tesla. I bought one of the first Model 3s, VIN 297, and I wanted to prove out like is this product really as good as it promises to be, and it was. And then a year later, because the one I had was the long range rear wheel drive, I had the opportunity as an employee. They were doing like the first ever discounts for employees. Basically, I could get like full self driving package and premium interior, roughly $10,000 of value for free as long as I bought in this like 2 day period. So like, okay, cool, let's do that. That's like roughly the depreciation I had on my first Model 3 was roughly $10,000. So I could basically upgrade to a dual motor, get a brand new car for free. Um, I then had two cars at 25, 26 years old, both about $50,000. Like, okay, I need to sell this first one. But I had it wrapped by Unplugged Performance for a cannonball run that we did. And so, yeah, basically, I'm like, well, I need to unwrap it. It's going to take me a while, make sure the paint's going to get detailed. And I had the videographer, the lead videographer at Tesla at the time say, oh, well, have you checked out Turo? And I was like, well, it's going to take me like at least a month, at least one car payment, roughly $1,000 before I can get rid of this car. So let me this month, before I have the time to actually unwrap it, let me list it on Turo.
Yeah.
And that first month it paid for itself. The next month it paid a little bit more than itself. The next month I bought another Model 3. And so then when the pandemic happened, I knew I wanted to start the Kilowatts. I knew back when I did that cannonball run, I wanted to do something like what the Kilowatts kind of vision became. And so
Yeah.
when the pandemic hit, I was like, I need to make a change. Information and accessibility are the two main things that are missing in the transition to EVs. So I'm going to try to do that. The accessibility, I'm going to grow this fleet. I'm going to, slowly add cars to whatever capacity I can. I didn't have any specific goals. And then I'm going to work on the information side. I'm going to, fight the FUD. I'm going to put out what is the most exciting thing in EVs. MKBHD is a big role model. He doesn't report on everything, but he reports on the most exciting, the most interesting things. And so, kind of taking part of that towards EVs of like, what are the best? How do I talk about the best? And that's kind of what I've been doing, and why, the great robo-taxi race. That's what's exciting to me, at least, is like the promise of what does this actually look like in practice? How do these three compare? So I'm always trying to just not just report on everything, but on what's the most interesting.
So tell us now about, how many cars you have on Turo, and then like again, just why you want to start another car sharing platform, how you want to do it differently.
Yeah. So I've got 13 cars that I manage. They're not all owned by the Kilowatts, but yeah, yeah, it's a lot.
That's
Every
crazy.
every day I'm moving a car or two, spending an hour, two, sometimes three, managing cars, which makes it hard to start a separate business, but it also is very real of like what that experience looks like. So I'm moving a car, prepping a car, cleaning a car, making sure it's not damaged. And I just think there's like a lot of ways that Turo does it well, but like when you narrow the focus into EVs, you see a lot of opportunity of like, again, if these cars can in the future potentially drive themselves, what can we do to prepare for that? What can we do to integrate? Like Turo uses smart car to actually communicate with the car, unlock the car, see its GPS location, but like they're not actively doing much. And I'll give this one away as a freebie if hopefully they don't use it before I do. But the idea of like, if you're renting my car, you're at Tejon Ranch, maybe you're out of charge, just filling up there, and your trip is supposed to end. Excuse me, my throat's sacking up. If
Oh,
you're
good.
uh, if you're if you're 5 hours away and your trip ends in 4 hours, we can do a lot to communicate both to the host and to the guest expectations, provide outs. If they've got another trip with their car booked, let them know what other cars are available. There's just a lot that we can do with just GPS, and there's so much more that we can do when you think about EVs, like from an EV first experience. So that's really the core of the business is let's just really hone in on EVs as the product. And as they evolve, let's evolve with them. Let's be agile. Let's like again, if these cars become autonomous, let's shift to where we are a dispatching service. We are not necessarily providing a car for you to use for the weekend. We may still do that, obviously, if that opportunity is there. But let's help the hosts in order to dispatch cars for potentially Tesla's robo-taxi service. So we're very aware that the future is coming, and that Turo as a platform, while it functions well to support all vehicles, doesn't really get to benefit that deeply from EVs, and we're going to lean into that and provide that benefit to us as well as our hosts, as well as our guests.
Yeah, no, especially I think, you have a lot of knowledge and history specifically with EVs, the cost of transportation, almost kind of being obsessed with that. So you get that EVs are the way to go. And then you have a 13 car fleet that you're either help managing or a lot of them that you own. So you have a lot of that expertise. And I think, what do you think is going to be potentially, one of the biggest hurdles to potentially not only just get more and more people onto adopting EVs, but really not even really adopting EVs, but just understanding that the cost of transportation is just that much better with an electric vehicle. Like, because this is your product, it is EVs, right? So it's like you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
all in on this. So what is it that you think? But yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and it's kind of a rock because I might even get emotional here. It's like, well, because like it has been like this has been the technology I think of our time of our generation. Like other than smartphones, we've not seen anything shift quite like this. And like it's really important for me on a personal level to have a positive impact on the world. And for the longest time, EVs haven't been kind of the guaranteed, haven't been the obvious choice for a lot of people. And to be honest, like the other, like, when Ford, it's for anyone that doesn't understand me or doesn't understand like what EVs have been through, it's going to sound funny, but when Ford announced, maybe it was when GM announced, but it was basically when they both announced that they were switching to NACS, the North American Charging Standard, another drum I've been beating of like, hey, this is really noticeably different and better, and especially like for America with CCS. While they are the biggest, they're also, I would potentially argue, I don't have the stats to prove, is like the least reliable. And at the end of the day, I think EVs have got like these companies, Ford, the F-150 Lightning, the Mach E, Porsche Taycan, like uh, Hyundai and Genesis. There's like so many great EVs at this point, but I've always been kind of like hesitant to recommend anything other than a Tesla because not having reliable charging is like you can't have that as your only vehicle, and most people, it's not realistic to have more than one vehicle per person. And so when we're starting to switch to NACS, the North American Charging Standard, instead of CCS, this big clunky cable. And again, I've got a YouTube video on this if you want to get more details on why I feel so passionately about this. But when they started announcing the switchover, and like again, when GM followed on, which is arguably a lagger in terms of technology, in terms of adopting the technology, it's like we're now seeing that companies are prioritizing the experience with EVs. They understand that this is like where we're going. They've made good enough products where they are investing. Like it feels like the last domino to fall is like, okay, let's actually make sure that that experience is better. Let's not just like, it's always been like some kind of compromise. You might have the most environmentally friendly car, but it's ugly. Tesla fixed that. And other companies have followed. But let me just say it shortly. It feels like the transition to EVs is more or less guaranteed now. And for me, that's really an emotional thing because I want to be a part of that impact. I feel like I have been a part of the impact. So like I asked my partner Corinne if I could take her out to the nicest dinner that we had, almost as important as like an anniversary, because this is like a moment where we're now seeing like it's going to happen. So you asked what is the resistance? I don't think there is resistance there anymore. I don't think anyone has a good argument anymore for why they won't switch over. There will still be people who buy gas cars, maybe for track days and whatever else. People still buy horses for, jockeying or whatever. But
Yeah.
like, within the decade, there's not going to like, there will not be anyone that is sane that is still buying a gas car within the decade. And
Yep.
that's just beautiful to be able to say that confidently. I'll bet anyone on that. And that wasn't the case up until that announcement.
Yeah. And what would you say, how does car sharing help with that adoption?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that one's a simple answer. It's just it gets butts in seats. It helps people experience it for the first time. It helps people access it when they're traveling. And again, there's a lot that we can do to make that experience better. If you've driven an EV before, these things are always connected to the internet. There's always enough power. Like you don't have to turn a 12-volt battery on or rely on a 12-volt. Like it's a paradigm shift in what these cars can do, and people can now experience it in many places, even if they've not. If a test drive doesn't convince them, maybe a night or a weekend with it will.
Yeah. No, well, no, that's just we all need to play a part in making this transition. It's not just going to be one person. And, it's important to have, people like yourself, even, really, it's crazy how even 2019, like when you were again buying one or two EVs, being 25, 26, having two EVs of being 100,000, but dollars probably to combined is just incredible just to see again. Just even 4 or 5 years ago, this was just, we weren't even sure if this company was going to make it, right? And here they are leading the way, right? And it was just Polestar this morning that came out and said that they're adopting the NACS. Obviously, that was going to be a matter of time given Volvo's announcement as well.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a village to make this happen. And I think thankfully we're probably at this point now where it's being a matter of time. And I think that, watching yourself, again, having the big Turo fleet, but also too now switching into dispatch, it's going to, all be helpful in just getting more butts and seats, but also too, really just, shaping the future of us getting to a sustainable future, right? That's the goal. So, but yeah, so I just want to personally just thank you for all the stuff that you do, that you've done for the club. Thank you for bringing your your green Model Y to the Electrify Expo this past weekend. We got desperate there. I think we literally had like 8 or 9 cars, but then at Friday at 4:00, people had bailed. So we literally sent out an email, and Ryan within minutes texted me and Kelvin and brought his car. So just a huge member of the community. So make sure I've put, several links in the description. Also to a link to the great race, Waymo, Cruise, and Tesla. Obviously you did get kind of a spoiler here. But just check out that epic video and really just comparing all three. And also too, again, I've tagged, Ryan, his 2 companies, Dispatch EV and Kilowatts, which is probably what you probably know him best by. But give him a follow and, just watch his journey. And hopefully Dispatch will be coming to a city near you. So, but yeah, thank you again for your time. And thanks for joining, this awesome video that we were able to put out today.
Thanks for having me, John. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your questions.
Definitely. So make sure to give Ryan, he's at Dispatch EV. He's also at Kilowatts, which is KLWTTS. So make sure you give him a follow. You probably have seen one of his videos of cars that hadn't been seen yet. He's caught quite a few of them. So make sure to give him a follow. But yeah, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.